Recording? Okay, so our first question, before you plant anything in the landscape, you need to mark the utility lines first. True or false?
True.
Oh my gosh, true. If you cut into a utility line, you get to pay the bill. So please have that locate done first. So very important piece right off the bat. So please do that. Blank should be done before ever purchasing plant material. Both. This is something that we get caught into, even experienced gardeners, master gardeners, and yours truly, where you see something like, man, I want that. And then you're thinking, oh, where am I going to put it? So don't fall into the trap. It's easy to fall into the trap. And so when we recommend things, it's best to find out, where you're going to plant it, where's the site that you're working with, and then you need to prep that soil. You need to do your soil tests. You need to amend the soils, everything before you plant. It's kind of like buying the fish before you buy the aquarium. So you better get the aquarium set up and running before you go out and buy the fish at the pet shop. So, okay, before purchasing plant material, what factors should be considered?
All of them?
You bet, all of them. And this goes back to right plant and right place. Remember, so we need the light, the water needs. We're going to group plants by water needs and care level. The planting zone, please do not plant different zones together. Try to avoid that. The correct environment is going to be important. So it's all of these above. So we try to go with North Platte. We are 5A, almost to 4. So McCook, clear to the south on the Kansas border, is that's a solid 5. You are touching 6. So you can do some different plant material choices than we can further north. So that's important to know. We have a huge set of territory in this master group that's represented. So always remember where you live and where you should be planting these plants. Okay, the next one is an open-ended question. Name 3 things that someone should check on plants before purchasing to make sure it's healthy and a quality specimen. So you guys can unmute your microphone. You can yell at me.
Check for bugs.
Yeah, it's X. That it is that the plant is turgid and it's not wilted. Okay. What else
Check
would
for
you look
broken
for?
branches.
Broken branches. What else would you look for?
If you can, if it's root bound.
Yeah, root bound. Look at the roots. Look at the color of the roots. Because white, cream roots, light yellow, those are good. Brown and black, not so. So, or if they're root bound, really important, because you can pull things out of those gallon pots real easy. Now, if you decide to take your knife and cut open in a ball and burlap tree, the nursery may not like that, but usually a good reputable nursery, if you want to ask to look at the root system on a ball and burlap tree, they will show you. Or sometimes you'll see them growing in pea gravel, and that allows those roots to go out and spread out instead of just doing the spinning thing. So if you see trees, bigger trees, usually in beds of pea gravel in a nursery, that's what they're doing. They're allowing those roots to spread out. So, which is a nice service for you because then you don't have as many curling, twisting, distorted roots. So, okay, what else? Anything else? Do you purchase something just because it's blooming?
At least you know the color then.
Yeah, you do know the color. That's true. And I will pick something if a bud is breaking and we're kind of getting to see a color, or maybe one's blooming, I will do that. But you don't have to have the thing in its full blaze of glory. The more important thing is to have a healthy plant. One thing I wanted to bring up that hadn't been brought up is symmetry. What's the symmetry of the plant? What's the structure of the plant? Whether it's a bedding plant or whether it's a rose bush or whether it's a shrub or a tree, is it Does it have symmetry? Is it balanced? Is that plant a balanced plant? So, it's not so much of a problem if it's a marigold or a petunia, because you're going to have it for one season and it's done. But when you buy anything that's a woody shrub on up, you definitely want something that has good structural symmetry. And in the case of trees, nice open wide branch angles, as much as possible for its species. So that's really important. Okay, when planting a tree, what should be visible just above the soil line?
Root flare.
You bet, the root flare. And if you ever see a tree that's been planted and it looks like someone shoved a lollipop in the ground, you planted it too deep. You need to see the beginning of that root flare just above the soil surface. And I had a really good analogy from my coworker over in Colorado, Northeast Colorado. She gave a great example of a swimmer. If your nose is just above water, you can breathe. But if you go a couple inches under, you can't breathe anymore. So it's like, yes, that's really good. She actually has a really nice piece of information she's going to share with me on what to do with taking apart a ball and burlap tree and correctly planting one. So hopefully Linda will be getting that to me so I can share with everyone. So yeah, that root flare is essential. You've got to have the root flare present. And so you don't want to bury that tree because you're going to cut off the oxygen and the carbon dioxide exchange. Okay, when selecting a tree, shrub, or perennial plant, the gardener needs to choose material that can grow to its full blank. Yep. So you need to choose, something that's going to go to its full potential in the spot that you're going to plant it. And so I've seen some humorous pictures, even in North Platte, where something was planted a little too close to the house, literally grew into the house. So they just took a chainsaw and, opened up the space between the tree, the shrub, and the house. So it just kind of like cut through it. So, it's so easy to want to plant to something way too close because our eyes trick us in that sense. So it's best for us to measure out what's that full spread of that canopy and how high is it going to get? Is it going to run into electrical lines? Is it going to hit a building? Is it going to overlap into the street? That's another big one, because if it goes into the street, then the city has domain where they'll saw it off, or they'll just tell you it's obstructing a view, especially in an intersection where we've had cases of that, and then that plant material has to come out. Actually, I got called into a city council meeting one time in Kansas where there was a beautiful Colorado blue spruce that was old and had plenty of room, but the thing grew into the street and it was blocking an intersection. So you had people that were upset because the city wanted to take it out, but it's just like, because it was a safety hazard at that point. So always think about the plant's full potential when you plant it. Is it going to outgrow that spot? Okay, applying mulch too deep will cut off what two things to the root system? We talked about them already. Oxygen and
water
and carbon dioxide. They both have to exchange in the soil. And if we cut that off, then that really does, it really just does some severe damage for us. This is kind of so this is my attempt to be using kind of shapes. A planting hole should ideally be in which shape? A V, like pointed, a U, or a shallow wide bowl? Yeah, needs to be shallow wide, especially with trees and shrubs. Have to be, because you don't want to plant them any deeper than that soil level is. And sometimes in your containers, especially with trees, the root flare has been buried, so you got to pull to find where the root flare is and then plant it no deeper than that. And so, but your bowl needs to kind of come out as a shallow bowl so those root systems can get started and take off. Slow, deep watering is the best method to water landscape plants. True or false? Absolutely true. It's kind of like the old saying, have you ever drank out of a full-blown fire hose? No, it doesn't work. It needs nice slow trickle. So we have infiltration. So, and will soil type impact the ability for water infiltration? You better believe it will. So that's really important. Because our wonderful clay soils move across and move horizontal. And instead of going where it wants to go, it ends up going into a ditch or somewhere else. So it just takes a long time for it to go down. Should a tree be staked tightly so the tree doesn't move? No. A tree should have some ability to move. It's basically conditioning the tree for the winds, and it also makes the root system expand out. So there's your quiz for landscape maintenance. I could have written a whole novel of questions. So was that too painful? Well, not too painful. Okay. So that is our quiz for tonight. That was last week's quiz. So I will log out of this Google account and go over into the class. So
Maybe it's just me, but your email hasn't shown up with the container plants.
yes, and sometimes that's something that I really get frustrated with because emails get really slow. I will show you the picture of everything. So of what we have, I'll give you a screenshot of that handout. So I apologize. That is kind of maddening. So we have a separate account for the Google Classroom. We are going more so into Google Classroom than anything for extension. And so we will see this much more in the future. We're in a migration of all of our files to Google OneDrive. And so this will be nice. So we already have our account set up, and our techies have been promising that the files are being migrated. So they're not done yet. So part of my computer is hands off. I can't even touch it. So we're just using what we need tonight and go with it. So here are the pieces for the combinations in the, so we have our handout, we have our video, so there's a video you can watch ahead and the list of the materials, and we can pop into those. So basically, if you have not watched this, we can definitely, we'll just talk about this, and I've heard her present this one before, which is good, because it's a good basic foundational thing, because we see more people getting more creative with these containers now more so than ever, and they've turned into a piece of the landscape as to dress up a landscape, add some variety with the architecture of the building, or to the theme, or to the look. And people just like to do containers. So we are experimenting more and more than we ever have before. So here is, and she's going to talk about the objectives, but the biggest thing for the containers is you can change them out every year. You can build themes with them. You can, if you like the latest trends that show up in a gardening magazine, you can steal ideas and replicate them here. You don't have to worry about a high alkaline soil. You can build a beautiful container. You don't have to do all the trick work like you would if you were in the ground. You can make seasonal ones because many times have you seen big containers been changed out for winter with the timbers and the fake holly and things that look nice and the holiday decoration kind of pieces, as well as, you know, starting right off early with your pansies and the little violas. Are a good choice to start right off with. And so they start to fade out, pluck them out, plant something different. So that's kind of fun with those. So, and it isn't an instant impact. So it's not like it's something you got to wait to grow and to develop. This is something will take off and it'll fill up and look pretty and you'll take care of it and love it. So, you know, all kinds of possibilities. And this is where you can bring in some really cool artistry. This is where you can get your art fix of looking at different colors. So when we talk about this, we're looking at different colors. We're looking at different textures, shapes. So look at some of these deck planters here. These are the ones that hook onto a railing. You can't even hardly see the container, but look at the beautiful plant material. And they've made that drape what we call a thriller, the thriller is usually your focal point, which would be your hanging basket there. Your filler is the coleus in there. And then you have the spillers, which are the ones that drape down. So, you know, you can have it draped to the side, you can have it symmetrical, you can have asymmetrical, you can play all these different textures, you can put some hardwood pieces in, driftwood, you can put in antiques. So, you know, kitchen clatter, you know, you can make it into whatever you want. You can make it folksy and informal, or you can make it extremely formal. You could add the statuary and combine it with statuary, or, you know, more of that formal look that you would see. So once again, is all the basics that Terry talks about, that we talk about in Master Gardener. The light, the water, the air temperature. The air movement is going to be really important, especially if we have a lot of humidity, to avoid some problems with our diseases. Relative humidity, of course, in western Nebraska and South Dakota, we're going to have lower relative humidity, and our nights are going to cool off faster than they are going to cool in western and eastern Nebraska, eastern South Dakota. So things get a little bit of a bounce and kind of recover a little easy. So that helps. And also fertilization. Fertilization and watering are going to be huge factors in containers, whether it's a small container or something really big, because these plants are going to be what we call a heavy feeder, meaning they're going to use a lot of fertility to be growing and blooming, and you're going to be deadheading if it has a lot of blossoms. And so it's going to have a lot of constant maintenance, because you're going to keep on feeding this container, and it's going to have the rest run out every time you water. So you're going to leach nutrients out all the time. So that's why you're going to be fertilizing more with these. This is where some of those commercial fertilizers that are water soluble, that you put in the watering can, they're readily available, will give that punch to those plants, which is really important. The containers, once again, this is kind of the sky is the limit. The biggest thing for the container is it needs to have a drain, some type of drain. So maybe it's terracotta, maybe, you know, in terracotta, maybe it doesn't have to have a drain because moisture will wick out of the sides. But that's going to be a little bit different strategy. You can do your succulent gardens where you may not need to have a drain hole, but it's really, really important to have that just in case. Did have a question on fertilizing. Probably is going to be every other week for sure, depending on the plant materials. every other week, kind of look at things, see if they're growing, they're blooming, they're bouncing, they've got that bounce to them, that they're really just responding to you. That's going to be really important. So, when we talk about the containers, we're looking for a focal point. We're looking, this is where you're going to imagine, okay, I've got this corner, I got this spot, and I want to put a excellent container garden out. So what kind of creeps in your mind with the container? Is it plastic? Is it terracotta? Is it glazed? And you can go to our nurseries and our garden centers, and they have beautiful selections you can choose from, all different colors, shapes, sizes, and price points for you to look at. So that's really important. They can be part of the design of an outdoor room. Not everyone has an outdoor kitchen, but you can make an outdoor patio room or a sunroom, beautiful place, and you can have those beautiful containers. Terry also talks about building a vegetable garden in these containers. Absolutely. The bigger ones are better, especially for vegetables that need more space, but you can use small pots to build beautiful herb gardens, and the herb gardens are very aromatic. So you have the ability to have that. And also, if you want to pick those herbs off to cook with, you got a double benefit. And if you ever like mint, putting mint in a container is a really good idea, because mint grows everywhere, and mint will take off out of your garden and go over to the neighbor's house. So it spreads. So for a very invasive herb like a mint, that's a really good idea. But you can combine herbs together. Different herbs will have your focal point, your filler, and your cascade as well. You can do that strictly in herbs, or you can double plant vegetables where you may have a beginning tomato plant, for instance, or a pepper plant that you can plant lettuce seed in, or you can plant radishes in. So once the radishes are done, you just pull them out. By the time they're done, the pepper or the tomato or the bigger vegetables taken over its space. So it's kind of like double cropping in a container. So you can do some cool stuff with that. So I think that's one of the things that we really wanted to focus on. And of course, Terry talks about the drain holes. We do need to have some ability to drain. The only exemption would be something that would be in like a rock garden setting, rock garden type plants, or your cacti that very rarely need moisture and it's going to dry out. So, but if you're an overwater, it's best to use a porous kind of container like terracotta, because if you overwater, you love it a little too much, the sides will dry out. And one trick that you will find is you look at your sides, the sidewalls of your container, and if your potting media and your soil mix are starting to pull away from the sides, you're dry. You're dry, and you really need to rehab that really quick, because what happens is soil, especially if you add a lot of potting mix with peat in it or ground moss in it, it will become hydrophobic, meaning you will put the water in and the water will just roll off and go right down. It will never absorb. So in the case of an emergency, you go get a big pan of water and a Rubbermaid tote, and you put that container in there and you help wick that up, and it'll help kind of push that potting mix back in. But that's out of an emergency. Please, you want to refrain from doing that, but it does happen. It also tends to really happen in hanging baskets. Just because we have hanging baskets and we're watering, we're not really looking to see what the potting mix is doing. And so, they pull away from the sides easy on a hanging basket, especially as they get smaller in size. So just something to think about. But watering with plastic or glazed ceramic is going to be much more consistent. But if you're one of those that tends to water a little too much, then a terracotta pot is a good choice. And terracotta is a very good focal feature in all different shapes and sizes to be putting in the landscape. So So it doesn't, you know, a simple clay pot can make a really neat statement with the right plant material, right combinations. And it's your creativity. So that's what's really important. So this is the next one, and I get arguments from people that do not put gravel or rocks in the bottom of the container for drainage. I just shared an article from Washington State Extension on Facebook today that talked about the reason why. When you put the rocks or the gravel or the broken pots, old terracotta pots in the bottom, what you've done is you've made a second layer that ends up being a wet sponge. So think of like having trench foot at the bottom of your container that never dries out. So what it ends up doing is it shortens your pot. It shortens your pot's capability because this is kind of an impermeable wet sponge that never dries out. So I'll send you the article, Larry. I'll send you the article. So, and that's where Washington State actually did some research. Like, I'll share this with everyone. So you can, and you can do styrofoam peanuts, or you can do the ones that don't use the ones that once they get wet. Well, the cornstarch ones, they evaporate. If they get wet, they just, then they're gone. The plastic bottles and the styrofoam I get because sometimes filling a big container is heavy, horribly heavy. I get that. So, but those are usually big containers where you'll have plenty of drainage. So that's important. So, so that's just a suggestion here. And so I will share that article from Washington State with you, which I thought was good. So then talking about doing your watering, you need to make sure, you know, check the sides of your containers. I have a fern. I had a fern in a container like this one that's on tip to its side. It's a big old terracotta. I couldn't get the fern out alive out of that pot. It grew so darn big. I ended up breaking the pot on accident because it was so root bound, but it was happy when it was in there. But you'll see the roots permeating out there, out of the bottom. And the idea when we water, and this comes from several different sources, including Dr. Alan Stevens, one of my professors at K-State many moons ago, is when you water until you start to see some moisture come out of the bottom. So another reason why your drain hole is important. So you see that you've watered the entire mass of the potting mix and the root mass. So you have a little bit of water pulling out, unless your potting media has shrunk it in from the sides. You got the gap, then you got to do that rescue treatment with the big tub of water. But once you can stick your index fingers down there in soil that's nice and moist, that helps. And the bigger the container, the slower it's going to dry out. The smaller the container, the quicker it's going to dry out. So that's something that's really important to remember. And you can do perennials. You do have the ability for perennials like ferns, where I would take them in over the winter. I'd bring them in. You can do mint. You can do your perennial herbs. You can do flowering perennials. You can bring them in where there's a shop and there's a shop light or enough supplemental light to keep them going. Some people will still take their geraniums, they'll cut them back and they'll put them under the, or in North Platte case, you put them in your crawl space, right? That people will do that. It's cool enough and temperate that and you keep them moist, that you can pull your geraniums out and boom, they'll come back. So so people will do that. So they're kept just moderately moist, cool environment, which a crawl space, in the case where North Platte, everyone has a crawl space instead of really a basement most of the time. So that's why I'm joking. But, you know, a light, a grow light will do that. We'll keep them going just enough to keep them moving along, which is really important. The table here that Terry has is one of the handouts that I sent with you on Friday. And this is the minimum size a container for vegetables. So if you're going to do a vegetable garden, this is what Terry has put together for your spacings. So for instance, for beans, it's for green beans, pole beans, the preference is a 2-gallon container, and you need to space the seeds or the plants 2 to 3 inches apart inside the container. So, and then she has minimum container depth. So a 2-gallon container, minimum 10 inches tall. So gives you kind of an idea of what's going to fit. And sometimes we try to plant material in too small of a container, and then we got to move up. Or sometimes you get something started in a container and then you move it on up. So in the case, like if you buy the tomato early, you know, your tomato transplants, and it's way too early to plant, you can raise those under the grow light, put them in a bigger pot, and then transfer them later once the soil warms up. So that's a good idea, because I will tell you, where we're at, sometimes the varieties that we want are not necessarily there all the time. So once you start to see them, whether it's a seed or a transplant, buy it and then keep track of it, take care of it until you can plant it. Because sometimes our choices just get picked over so fast. So, so that's really important to remember. So this gives us some different spacings for different stuff, but it gives you the bare minimum, and that's what's important to remember. So, you know, if you lived in a bigger area, or if you go to the city and you have a chance to go by and do some more selection, you know, every once in a while, it's kind of fun to go on those road trips and look for plant material that we don't necessarily have around locally, and maybe some more variety. So that's good. So the best thing is also to look at quality plants that are healthy. And it goes back to some of that landscape maintenance concept that we talked about in the quiz. So we want to look for a plant that's nice filled out in the container. We want to make sure that it has nice symmetry, that it's not broken in half, that it's nice and turgid and full. It's not wimpy and wilting, that, you know, it's got, doesn't have insects, or it doesn't have a presence of a possible disease. You know, you can pull it out of that 6-pack, or you can pull it out of that container. Look at the roots. Are the roots nice and ivory color? Those are all very good things to look at. And gosh knows, it's just like the people that go and thump the watermelons in the grocery store. You can pull a bedding plant out of a container and look at it. It's okay. So be gentle with it and put it back in. But you want to buy good quality. So very important here. So this is where Terry was talking about the thrillers, the fillers, and the spillers, and textures, arrangements, and colors. And so here's some examples of your thriller is your focal point in the container. So it does not have to be dead center, and it doesn't have to be something tall. It could be something that's kind of rounded. It could be something that fans out. You know, it doesn't have to be you know, like a lightning rod. It can be different textures. Maybe the focal point is because it just has this awesome texture to it that's totally different. So thinking like planting a huge asparagus fern as your thriller because of the ferny texture of the foliage. That's the thrill. So then you're going to play off of that center or your focal point. So what's going to be a nice color complement or a contrast? Do you want soft colors? Do you want bold colors? Do you want different leaf shapes? All those different cool things that you can play with. And so this is where the art joins the science. So we're going to look at, you know, your plant size of your container, looking at the plant materials. So we see that we have some sweet potato vine in this one, the chartreuse one. So we're going to look at that sweet potato vine. We're going to look how big is it going to fit? How big is it going to get? We're going to use it as a spiller. So we're going to orient it so it can spill. And how much space is it going to allow for something else? Are you going to have something that's going to be every so often? Does it repeat? Usually when we plant in containers, we plant in odd numbers. So your thriller is a one, and then we can do 3s and 5s. And with the little stuff, you can do 7s. But as you get a bigger container, the more 1s, 3s, 5s, and 7, more 3, 5s, and 7s that you can do. So odd numbers are good to repeat in a container. And so you can orient them in different groupings and it'll make it, this is the artistry part of the fun. So, it can be more of a formal look. We have some great ones that play off of different cultures. Some of the Oriental styles are really neat. They're more sparse. They're very sleek. So, they're not symmetrical necessarily. So, but some people are very symmetrical minded. So it just depends on what you like. So that's that one. The soil, we talk about potting mixes. We talk about substrate. We talk about media. We really need to be using this kind of material. Really avoid a lot of field soil because just the drainage, especially on these bedding plants, these annuals, is just really, really tough on these plants. So we need to be using good quality potting mix. And as the old adage goes, you get what you pay for, is exactly the truth on the quality of this material. So if you skimp, you will tell the quality of the potting mix varies a bunch. So if you also get something that has moisture control or those little polymers that hydrate, be careful. Be careful with those because you can fill up a container and plant everything with that stuff in there. You can water it, and those, if you have not hydrated those polymers, it will come out like a big old blob of rice coming out of a cooking pan, out of the saucepan. It will literally fill up. Those little polymers will expand, literally push all the potting material and the plants right out the top of the pot. So if you use the moisture control potting soil, get that wet first and let it expand in the container and then plant. So that's really important with those. Also, if you use the moisture control potting soil, be extremely careful not to let it dry out because that becomes extremely hydrophobic. It is very difficult to rehydrate it once it dries out too. Once it gets to point of no return, it's really hard to rehydrate that one. So that's a tough one. So this is what Terry's talking about, what we were talking about. So we want some good moss in there, some peat in there. It usually has vermiculite or perlite. Vermiculite is basically very fine ground stone in there. It has a little lime added to that potting soil, which makes it a little acidic because a lot of these plants like some acid. So if you will see fertilizers for acid blooming plants, our bedding plants do like to be on the acid side. And since we are in a container, we can maintain some of that acidity that we just struggle with in the ground. So that'll be important. It's important for us to have water drainage, but also some capacity to hold the nutrients. So that's why when we water with that fertilizer, you're going to lose some fertilizer all the time that's going to drain out. And so that's why we're going to be constantly feeding this critter all the time too. So yes, that is a great one. And that's one that I recommended today on the Facebook group. Is a coffee filter is one of your best friends because it's fine enough to allow water to come through, but it holds your potting mix, so you're not losing your potting mix. So just put some coffee filters in the bottom of your container, and that works out great. And it doesn't have to be fancy ones. You can buy the El Cheapo coffee filters, and it's super. Or if you don't have that, you can use newsprint. So if you have a couple sheets of old newspaper will work too. So, and it's all biodegradable, so that's a good choice. So fertilizing, we have several different choices. We have, you will have fertilizer put in a lot of your potting mixes, and they'll say a slow release. That means it's going to release the fertilizer combination over time. So it's going to constantly give it, feed it every so often. So it's kind of like getting that regular spoonful every so often, versus fast release water soluble that you're going to add to your water. That's like your 6-pack of Mountain Dew. Boom, you're going to get that nutrient right away. So it's kind of nice in containers to mix both of them, to have some slow release in your potting mix. And if you buy potting mix without the slow release fertilizer, you can buy slow release separately. It looks like little beads. I'm trying to think. They're like little beads that will degrade down. They'll get wet and they'll break down. So as they break down, then they get the fertilizer. So I will do both. I will put the slow release fertilizer. One of them is called Osmocote, that I will mix in with my potting mix and my containers and before I plant. And then I will supplement water once every other week with the fast release, the water soluble fertilizers such as a Miracle-Gro. But there's 5 bazillion combinations under different names with the same product basically. So, but Miracle-Gro is one brand name that everyone kind of remembers.
Does it carry over from year to year? Is the nitrogen, is it gone?
A lot of times the nitrogen is gone. The question is, if you have soil mix from a previous container that came out of healthy plant material, you just took the plant material out, usually it's pretty much gone. So because we put so much water through the container, there's hardly anything left at the end of the season. So you'll see on the container potting mix, if they'll say if it feeds 3 months or 6 months. So you'll see both. So kind of plan accordingly. Or if it doesn't have any, you just go buy your own and you mix it in, and it'll give you the instructions on how to mix that. So I water every day on my containers. It's absolutely essential to stay hydrated. And then I fertilize once a week. So unless it's getting wimpy, and then I feel like I'm going to have to give it another extra shot. So, we talk about the right plant in the right place. Please do not put shade-loving bedding plants out in the baking sun. That just doesn't work. One that we do kind of play with a little bit is coleus. Coleus likes filtered light, but it's a sun coleus does not do well out in full sun in western Nebraska. It just, that's going past its limits. But that's one that you will take some filtered light, but just not the sun. And it's not just the sun, it's also the wind out here. And that's why hanging baskets, unless they're in a protected alcove or on a porch or on an exposure where there's not a lot of wind, or if you're in a neighborhood that has a lot of trees, out on a farmstead or an acreage where there's no protection from the wind, those poor baskets get beaten to death. So got to keep them hydrated. Also, keeping them hydrated keeps them weighted down so they don't fly. So that's another thing to think of too. So, we're talking about doing the containers and looking at your plants. And here's a cool one with some millet in here. And the purple millet, it's an annual that works great. You have your chartreuse Looks like some more sweet potato vine and some coleus tucked in here and some moneywort trailing down on the side. So as things are growing and developing, you want to, clear out anything that's dead or dying, that's bloomed and the blooms are spent, clean them up. Because then that energy, the plant doesn't have to try to maintain something that's shot. So clean it up and get it, groom it up and do a nice job. And containers, some of these places, some of these greenhouses and nurseries just have so many to choose from. So, the sky's the limit on what you want to do and how big and how elaborate you want to be. So I have my containers, they all fit my wife's choices of color against our house, and I keep them protected and I bring them out. They're out here now on the south side of the porch. So in the protected areas. So once it gets to be bedding plant season, we'll be ready to go again. So. And so, like that's a lot of it, is that sometimes people will have container parties and they will, spend some time at a greenhouse or nursery, and you'll have people get together and instead of the painting parties, they have container garden parties where you go out and you pick your container and you pick out your stuff, and the garden center staff helps you put your ideal container together. So, some people like the painting where you see everyone has their paintings and they drink the wine. Well, some people go to greenhouses and do their container parties, so with their container plants. So yes, it can be quite the deal here. So I do have, there's some lists of some resources here that are above and beyond. And what I can do is I can pull up each one. So like this one is redirecting. It did, it redirected it here. So here's some annuals. Here's a list of annuals. I will keep all of these up and I will send these to you as a email tomorrow. But here's some of those lists of different annuals that work good and gives you your scientific name, your site, whether it's a sun or part shade or shade. Remember, you're going to see a lot more sun plants. You're going to be shade plants. You're not going to have as many on your palette for shade. Height, what kind of foliage it has or flowering, and then any comments, best uses, or, whether it's something that trails really well, like Bacopa here, and it spreads 15 to 24 inches. Good information to know. Will help you space plant materials out in the container. And maybe you've got so many great plants, you need to have a bigger container. That happens a lot. So, so that's kind of cool. So Terry did pack these in here. So I wanted to show you, this is one of those that's in here. And so when we go to break, I will put these in an email to everyone, and I'll email them. I can actually email it out tonight yet. So there's annuals, there's a wildflower one. So you can treat wildflowers as an annual. So if you do not want them around for the next season, that's fine. You can treat them as an annual, you can toss them. Or if you decide you want to plant them, you can plant them and repurpose them. So, so there's nothing wrong with repurposing. Spring bulbs, you will see now, you'll see the bulb pans that are coming out with the tulips or the hyacinths that they're blooming. And so after they're done, you can replant them into your landscape, for instance. So once they're spent, but there will be people that will plan their containers and put spring flowering bulbs that have been cold treated, put them into the pans for early spring, and they'll be blooming on their porches. So really pretty nice. The container vegetable gardening one you have with you. There's one on a guide to selecting houseplants. And I don't know if I've ever shown you this one. This is one that I helped author. Nope, not that one. That was revised one. This is one that Ann Strike did a number of years ago. So these are houseplants based on water use, humidity, and light. And so they've got this little legend here on the table. So here's some different bromeliads, which are relation to pineapples. And so you will see these beautiful plants a lot of times at florist shops, or you'll see them at nurseries during the growing season, and you'll use them. I have a black one, a black bromelid right now at home that I could have brought, I should have brought to show you. You can incorporate house plants into your containers, depending on how fancy you want them to be. So, you know, if you wanted to do just a whole thing of cacti, for instance, you could do a whole container of cacti, and hopefully something that's light enough for you to pick up and move around. So that's really cool. Your ferns are a great filler plant. So no, the question is, does the houseplant neb guide give toxicity levels to animals? No, Elaine, I will put one out. There was one from the University of Connecticut Extension that I used to reference on toxicity to animals. And so during our break, we can look for that one. So we'll look for that one. How about that? So there's also different types of fig. So your weeping fig, you know, the ficus, or your rubber plant is technically a fig. So you can use a rubber plant as your focal point, you know, and just treat it as an annual, or at the end of the season, you want to dig it up and put it in its pot and treat it as its own thing. At the end of the year, you can repurpose these plants out really nice. Same thing with your ivies. You know, Swedish ivy is a really nice trailing plant. It's a very nice house plant. So if you want to plant using Swedish ivy, you can gather it up and put it in a different container for the growing season indoors. Palms, we use a lot of palms, and some of the other house plants that maybe aren't as nice, but you have lots of choices. So Chinese evergreen would be another one that would be good. A croton. Crotons love the sun. They're very bright, colorful. Dieffenbachia, which is the dumb cane. This one is definitely toxic, Elaine. So that would be one that would be a big no-no. But we have lots of different types of houseplants that you can incorporate in. Just remember, you're going to match things by your water, your light, and your humidity needs, and then the minimum night temperature. So some of these containers with some of these plants are going to have to go into protection a little earlier than some. So just to be understandable, once we get into the fall, these will have to go into more protection. So, okay. So that's one of those. So I wanted to show you that as kind of a fun one. So trying to get back over to my presentation here. Sometimes it's a little challenging to jump over when we got this bar here. But there are lots of neat houseplants and plants that you can use. And so I just want you to remember how many options you really do have to use for this this type of things. So we have that. And so there's lots of trends that come in. So you can check out the National Garden Bureau. That's another resource. It'll talk about the different types of annuals, perennials, bulbs, edibles. You can plant vegetables and herbs in there. You could even plant a small shrub in there. You could put a small shrub in a container and then put the pretties around it. So that's another idea. So here's some examples that plants and flowers of the year. So, your Monarda, which is bee balm. There's lots of different types of improved bee balm outside of the wild stuff. The bulb is the hyacinth this year. The hardy hibiscus, which is our perennial hibiscus. That would be a really neat big container. Green beans. You could actually grow Kentucky Wonder in a container and let it vine all over the place. And then the sunflower also. So lots of different choices. So catmint here, look at catmint. See how it, this is one that you don't want to overwater, because if it overwaters, it flops. So think of someone that has a comb over and the wind comes in and blows it apart and it just kind of spreads and falls down. So you definitely want to just let it have what Mother Nature gives it and don't overwater it. The herb of the year are parsleys. Parsley was also a beneficial attractant to butterfly larvae, especially our swallowtails and our monarchs. We also have our AAS, which is All American Selections. If you Google All American Selections, it'll show you the new plants of the year, which are wonderful. So here's the vegetable winner is a small pumpkin called Goldilocks. Then we have a zinnia, profusion red, yellow bicolor. It's a real eye catcher. And see how it looks with the timbers, the contrast. And people put timbers also into containers, depending on how big they are. So lots of different choices. And so that is the slide set from Terry's presentation. You can also watch the same presentation on the class as well. I wanted to give you my thoughts too, as well to share. So are there any questions for now? Because what I'm going to do is we're going to take a break and I'm going to start transferring all of these NebGuide links onto an email, mass email, so you all get it tonight so you can play around with those. Any questions in the room or outside? Yes.
Maybe I need to be more creative, but like you say, a lot of times it's just what you can get out there. And so I use petunias quite a bit. And they
Yes.
look great until, like about August or so. And even though I'm deadheading them and I'm trimming them back and I'm fertilizing, is there any suggestion of how to keep them looking great?
Yes, because petunias can get really straggly and ratty.
Yeah.
All the time. And so when I was a college student, our floriculture professor went and looked at some of the petunias that we raised that stretched too much, and she just took a shears and would I had just cut them back, and everyone kind of like, it's like, oh my gosh, she killed it, but they come back fuller that way. So using a sharp paring knife is better than a scissors, but yeah, Dr. Kim Williams, they were too leggy to travel with. And we had a few more weeks before they would be shipped out on the trucks to the variety trials across the state of Kansas. And so you don't want annuals that are leggy going on a truck because they're going to get smashed to smithereens. And so she said, we're going to fix this. And we're going to show you how to give some tough love. And so, and you always go to the joints, but, that's the way you do it. And they come back fuller. And as the nights cool down, days cool down, we get into fall weather, they tend to double back a little bit for you.
And I have
But yeah, I about had a stroke when she first did that though.
I usually don't take more than a third off, but maybe I'm being too gentle.
You can cut them off, you can cut them in half.
Okay.
Yeah, you can take them back further. That's where I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe she's doing this. So, but yes, Dr. Williams did that. So that was definitely an eye opener. And she said they'll bounce back, and they did. They came back fuller, they came back thicker. And so they were better plants to put in the trials. Because Kansas State University had bedding plant trials and all the research farms across the state. And they do evaluation. Dr. Alan Stevens, who I talked about earlier, was the one who did the evaluation on all of those plants. So he would go from research farm to research farm and do the evaluation of how well they performed in the different environments. Because the environments in Kansas vary drastically, just like they do in Nebraska. So.
One of the things I've learned to do with petunias is I run 2 sets of pots. So the ones I have cut back hard, they get moved into the backyard where hardly anybody sees them.
Sure, they're going through rehab.
Yeah, and then the ones that I had cut off earlier and now are full and looking good again, I moved them out to the front. So
Yeah.
they always look fresh that way. It's a little
Yeah.
bit of a cheat, but it's one thing you can do with pots. You can
Yes.
do that.
You know, never underestimate the ability of being able to be portable.
Right.
Huge, that's a huge perk.
Well, I
Huge.
love my petunias, and they a particular kind is a favorite of mine, and so that's what I do to have them fresh all the time.
And that's one way to do triage. Basically, you did a great job with triage right there. You let them recoup, and then they're going to bounce back for you. So, and that's one of the things, petunias are very forgiving. So, but they do get leggy, and once they get to that leggy, gangly, yucky stage, then they do need to get cut back pretty good. So, okay, do we want to take a 10-minute break? Go to the bathroom, get your coffee, and then I will start putting that email together with all of our NEB guides that were off of Terry's slide set. So I'm going to resume recording. Here is the actual article that was written. And so they do have kind of a neat set of what they call myth busters. So goes back to the Epsom salts, like some people always put Epsom salts on stuff, and it varies with your soil tests and your soil types. So it doesn't work for just everyone. And here's another one on the myth of drainage on the planting. So it talks about that interface layer, and that interface inhibits the ability to drain out. So that's like I was talking about trench foot. So it's like it just never dries out. So this is the article that came from Washington State. And so that's a nice little article. And I can also send you the, I can put this in the chat. I can also put it on an email with the quiz too. But I think that's something that's really good, because this is something that you will face with containers. And so, yeah, but that was something that was done. It dates back from an old horticulture publication years and years ago, and then everyone really adapted to it and used it. So, and then they found out that wasn't so good after all. That's kind of like, we used to put pruning seal on trees. That's something we don't do anymore. So practices have changed and evolved, but this is where they actually did some research. So the Mythbusters up in Washington State actually test stuff out. So this is garden myth busting. So it's kind of handy. So kind of shows you what the science behind it. It's actually some stuff that's pretty specific. So, and I thought this was really good with the plants themselves, because drainage is going to be very important. Anything that has a fine fibrous root system is going to be extremely important to you to have a really well-drained soil and for any extra moisture to escape. So you want to make sure that you continue that.
But if you use mulch in the bottom of that mulch will rot.
The mulch will rot down, yes, and see, that's where you gotta, if you do mulch, you wanna not make a true separate layer. Where that gravel is a definite texture difference, if you can transfer some mulch into the bottom of your potting material, then you at least have a transition. Where they're talking is when you put rock, a different material that is starkly different, that's not going to break down, and it's its own layer, that's where you get the problems. So if you mix some mulch in with your potting mix in that bottom and kind of build it up, then it would have the chance to drain down. It's when you have two different layers, like a layer cake, that's when the drainage gets to be a problem. So I sent those pieces out, and I can send you the article and the quiz. Is there anything else tonight that you would like to talk about or have questions about with containers? It's the sky is the limit, and a lot of it's just being a savvy shopper when it comes to looking at the plants as they come out. One thing I would like to talk about before we wrap up tonight is hardening your bedding plants, just like you would harden your vegetable plants. So if you have bedding plants, you see them, you really like it, you know that the chances of them staying on the shelf very long aren't that great. It's okay to buy them and then take them, get them under a grow light. And then as the days get warmer, we're going to put them out. We're going to put them outside and let them be outside in the warm days and let them get acclimated to the breeze and toughen those tender plants up, because they're coming right out of a commercial greenhouse and off of a truck. So they need to be kind of bolstered up. They're kind of wimpy. So we want to put those out in a protected area in the sun or on overhang, get them exposed to the environment, bring them back in at night, and then out. So you do that for a 2-week process. That's the same process we do with our vegetable transplants. And when you harden your bedding plants, then you will not go through the transplant shock of things looking kind of wimpy and weak after you plant them. They will be tougher. And another thing is, when you pull those plants out of those containers, don't just dig a hole and plop them in the ground. Pull them out of that container, rip those roots apart. Let those roots have the ability to go and spread, because Larry Thrum here in our group today talked about Spike being being the thriller and the container garden for his wife. Jenny loves Spike. His wife loves Spike in the container as well. By the end of the season, it's just one big giant mat of roots. So because they've had the chance to spread out. So it's important to take those annuals, pull them out of the container, rip those roots apart, let them take off, because you don't want them to spin. You want them to grow out and establish themselves. So that's really important. It's 8:50. The time has flown by really fast, but lots and lots of choices. You've got all the extra neb guides now. They're either in your inbox or on their way. I know Elaine said that they just came. So those came to her pretty quick, but everyone has them in one form or another and out in the internet on their way to your email inbox. So any questions for tonight? Okay.
I'd just like to know what some of your favorite plants are to use in containers.
Well, I like terracotta, and I like the glazed. I like using a lot of your silvers, the plants that have a silver cast to them, and I will put them up against red and something that's blooming red. So something really simple, super inexpensive would be planting like red salvia that has this red spikelets, pretty red spikelets, or the purple ones. You can get the purple ones too, and put Dusty Miller as your filler around. And then you add that red playing off with the silver. So that's really attractive. Or you can do the millets like the example with the millet. You can do the green millet or the purple millet, and then you can do foliage plants like the different shades of coleus in the example that has the browns and the golds. So if you want really bold colors like silver and red together that look really good for the university, playing that, or if you want lots of muted colors, I like them in different scenarios. If you want the pop of color, I do like the bold. I tend to do, I've not played with house plants in with my containers. I guess I'm more of the conservative type, but I like the cactus gardens. I like the cactus dish gardens and the different types of succulents. They do excellent on our south facing porch, and they really thrive. And then I can bring them in for the winter and they look really nice inside. So I try to get as much use out of them. So when we talked about using some of these other plants, like putting a wildflower in containers, I would take that wildflower out towards the end of the season. I'd plant it in the ground. I get another use out of it and then try something different. Or if it had like a philodendron or a Chinese evergreen, for instance, if you use that as a piece of plant material in a container, I would take it apart and I would repot it and I would reuse it. I'm one that's really big on repurposing plant materials. If they last during the winter and you can use them again, they look fine, great. If they don't, hey, we gave it the good college try and we call it good. And you try over. But the person that is in my household that's really the creative one is my wife. And so she likes ideas of colors, and then she tells me her colors, and then I go and say, okay, these have similar needs, so similar water, similar light, similar exposure. So she sees the possibility with the colors, and I see the realities of right plant, right place, putting it all to work, putting it together so it will grow together into the same containers. So I can draw good stick figures, but she's the real container. She's the one who really gets into the containers. And so that's always part of her Mother's Day, is that we pick out bedding plants for her. And so she gives me ideas of her colors that she likes. And then that's what we do, is we build her container gardens. She has an old kettle, the type of kettle that people would have made soap in, cast iron one. And so that's what we always plant in. So, and it's got enough shade exposure from our maple tree that we can put a Martha Washington geranium in there and it'll bloom all through fall. So my wife likes Martha Washington geraniums, or what we call a regal geranium. So yeah, it's kind of cool. I wish that we could do a lot more choices. And so if I really want my fix, I know in the past our Master Gardener group has done this, and maybe in our praying post-COVID world, I would like to take the group out again to Colorado State University to see the bedding plant trials and go out and see the greenhouses, because there are several really nice nurseries that give you, they have all the plant materials, they have all the containers, and then you can just go gaga and look at all this stuff and you can see the possibilities and some stuff that you don't necessarily see here. And you can tell the people that have been out of town that have been shopping and bring cool stuff in. So, but I usually work with stuff that we have here. So, but I like to go dream too. But when it comes to the artistic side, I'm not the really, I'm more the very functional type. But I can tell you what grows together well and what takes about the same amount of light, the same amount of color. And so So that's where I come in. But yeah, monochromatics where you do different colors, different shades of the colors. So if you are a big, like oranges and purples are good complements on the color wheel. Orange and blue are, if you look at the color wheel, orange and blue are across from each other. Blue and gold work good together. Remember with your colors that it's important that if you have warm colors, your warm colors are your yellows, your oranges, and your reds, red shades of red. Those are warms, and those colors will overpower purples and blues and violets and greens. So if you want something that's got some purple or some violet in it or some blue in it, you're gonna have to really mask them and either have a lot of purples and blues and greens mixed together, or if you do have some really warm colors in there, don't put all three of them in, maybe put an orange in, maybe put a yellow in, maybe put a red in, but don't put all three in because your eye will only look at those three hot colors and the other will disappear. So always think about that when you do. So, that's why white or off-white or pale pink is a good mix in with violets and blues and greens, because it's not going to overpower. So it'll contrast but not overpower. Sometimes it brings that blue out colors. So that's where the artistic side comes in. So, but yeah, lots of fun. Lots of fun. And some people will do themes, some people will do monochromatic, some people will do complements. And there is a publication from Colorado State that talks about that with the color wheel. So maybe I'll send that out too. So, but I can ship as many neb guides and publications to you as you like. So I'll send as many as you want. You can chew through them. So any more questions for tonight? But yeah, I like simple. I like functional. It has to look good with the surroundings. Does that make sense? I like it to complement the structure and the architecture around with what I have. And so I have a mid-century modern house, so I have to work with lots of nice vertical lines, vertical and horizontal lines everywhere. So I will do that for sure. So sometimes I use some taller plant material to break up those long lines, or maybe I do something that's very airy, like papyrus grass, the Japanese or the Egyptian paper grass, because it's airy and it's light and it breaks up those strong, bold lines. So soften a little bit. Or maybe I want to go really stark and I put timbers in the containers. For instance, the little birch timbers that are really popular, for instance. So but I like to go see ideas. So that's the biggest thing, is go get ideas to go check on. So are there any other questions? If not, I'm going to stop the recording for tonight. And